told, but there was never any contact. There was nothing going on. So I try to err on the side of telling, because one guy started dating for a while and I liked him and it didn't tell him up front. When I told him probably a month or so later, he said he had a really negative reaction and it kind of stung me. So I said, okay, going back to my old rule, tell up front. But, the way I took that though was it could have been anything that person didn't like. We meet people to date and we don't like the way they do this. We don't like that. And so I took it the same way. Okay, whatever, it could have been my size. It could have been the way I talked. It could have been anything. So nowadays I don't really let it get to me because I'm just straight up out loud.
Thank you.
Those are real teachable moments too.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I have a friend, she says she tells them, and in 2 weeks, if they're not over it, she's moving on. We give you 2 weeks. Go do some research, go educate yourself. You can come back and ask me questions, but if you still have challenges, no problem. Just keep it moving.
Thanks. So someone put a comment here in the Q&A that I went to see a dentist and disclosed the doctor refused to treat me and told me he had to talk to my immunologist before he would begin treatment. That is discrimination. That is actually not, that's not legal, right?
Mm-mm.
Wait, that a doctor can refuse to see you?
A dentist.
If it isn't, I sure hear about it happening a lot. What's legal and what happens is probably two different things.
Yeah, unfortunately. Here's a question. Do you ladies feel like stigma around HIV is still happening in today's medical field and the community?
Yes.
It is still happening. I'm living proof, and I tell my story often. Back in 2013, I met this young man, and after being told that I should get my stuff cut out, that I should never have any other children because of my HIV status, it devastated me. And 20 years down the line, I became pregnant and was treated okay. The 8th month of my pregnancy, they noticed that my son was losing blood on the inside, and they refused to deliver my son as if though they were waiting on him to die. And when they finally delivered him, it was after 19 hours of begging and asking them to please take him out to see what was wrong with him. And when they delivered him, he had lost so much blood, 98% of his blood he had lost. And they gave him several blood transfusions. Come to find out that they gave him the wrong blood, so because he was O positive. And they gave him the wrong blood. So the doctors kept calling me and saying, we've never worked with anybody like you. I've never worked with people like you. And your son is going to die. We don't know what to do. Your son is going to die. And so I went to go see my son. He said, call the family in. So I got around and I saw my son, and I didn't want to hold my son. So the doctor just kept going off. And they closed the curtain because I screamed. And when I screamed, they started pulling the plugs. They pulled the plug on my son and took his life. And when I screamed, I said, do you have to do this? And the doctor says, yes, there's nothing else we could do. And so it's greatly still out there. Stigma killed my son. Stigma took my son's life. And I still think about that daily. My son will be 4 years old. His heavenly birthday, he'll be 4, March the 19th. And so I celebrate him still not right now today. And that's why I do what I do. And that's why I continue to tell my story no matter what.
I'm so sorry, Stacy. And I've heard your story before, but every time it makes me want to cry. It's so terrible, so unfair. Thank you so much for sharing that with folks. Does anyone else have anything they want to say around stigma in the medical field? Or
It's unfortunate, not because I hear it all the time and have to experience it and go and either educate the doctors or experience judgment or experience. One of my doctors, my HIV doctor, I go see her and I don't always look at the paper that they give me where they tell me what you're going to do next. And I happened to look down at it one day, and under the comments it had counsel to, it's like they talked to me about learning to practice safe sex. And it was on my record, like, this is something we discussed. And I emailed her back and said, where did this come from? First of all, we didn't talk about sex, and you don't have to teach me about having safe sex. But it was so insulting. It was so insulting. So I think we have some big issues because doctors don't know what to do. They don't know how to treat it. And with women, I've known women who've gone in and just even asked for HIV test, and the doctor was, oh, you don't look like them, you don't need it. So there's still a lot of subjective things happening based on doctors' lack of knowledge or their own biases and issues.
Yeah. Wow.
I would like to say, sorry.
No, go ahead.
That I have changed my providers many times when I felt as if I couldn't be open with them. And it's okay, that's our right. And sometimes, we as a patient tend to think about the doctor's feelings more than the doctor may think about our feelings. But we have to think more about our health and getting our needs met. And if we don't have a comfortable provider, we're not going to be able to communicate our issues and have them addressed. So I encourage people to change your provider if it needs to happen. Maybe there's another provider in the same office, or if you need to change to a whole different medical center, just let it happen for the well-being of your medical conditions.
Yeah, definitely. I see some really interesting stuff happening in the chat box. I would love it if you all would put those into the Q&A box so we don't lose them as people continue to comment over there. Some of them would be great also to share with the group. So if you're putting something in the chat box that you would like everyone to see or hear, if you want to copy and paste it into the Q&A box, I would love to share that with folks. So we have a question here. I have a client whose mother is actually the one who is disclosing her HIV status to anyone who will listen, and it's done in a very degrading manner. What can I do as a case manager to assist my client in how to handle the situation, especially since it's coming from her mother? It's a tough one.
Yeah.
Well, I will start by, it sounds like an intervention may need to be done, not just with her alone, because she probably alone have communicated with her mom that she would like her not to go about disclosing her status.
I think we may have lost you there, Shyronn. Sorry, you're kind of coming in and out. You're breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat what you just said?
I was just getting to the point of saying it may be a point for her to get assistance with talking with her mom and getting some assistance from some other folks who may hold some information, you know, even if it's legal information or you know, some information, maybe if she want to go about it in the civil court, or you know, just different perspectives and different people helping her have this conversation to get her mom to stop disclosing her status in a way that she's not comfortable with. I just think she may need some additional support in getting that message to her mom, because I've tried one-on-one to get that message to her mom and it's just not working.
You know, I think sometimes we get to be angry at our family members who are disclosing or who are uneducated and are talking about us in ways that's not appropriate. And I know in the early days of my diagnosis, my mom, I mean, literally was telling people at the grocery store because she was trying to process her grief and anger and whatever the hell. And I just told her she had to cut it out. And that if she didn't cut it out, that I was going to need to stop seeing her in my life, because it became right? No, it became this thing that was about her. And it wasn't about me. And it wasn't about how she could help support me. And I think that, you know, sometimes anger is a justifiable response to people, and especially family members who are being inappropriate. And like, this to me is violence. This is violence against the daughter. And yeah, how do we stand in solidarity with people who are suffering this? I think you're even asking the question is powerful.
Yeah. Thank you. So I have a question here for folks living with HIV who are also working or volunteering in the field. I was wondering if you can talk about how you manage boundaries and just everyday small talk and conversation. For example, when someone's sitting next to you on the plane or at a party is like, what do you do? And how did you get into that? This opens the door for disclosure, but for me, sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. It really depends on my mood and whether I want to get into a conversation about it at that particular moment. And sometimes I just don't. I want to zone out and watch a movie and not educate the person next to me. I was wondering if panelists can talk about how they manage boundaries and self-care around this.
Mm-hmm. I would say I ditto everything the person said, because, you know, it just, sometimes you just don't want to go there. I just want a cab ride. I just want to, you know, sit next to somebody without saying it. So I think I do the exact same thing. Sometimes I don't feel like teaching. I don't feel like you know, I don't feel like it. And then there are other times when, because I'm on a mission to show as many people the faces of what a woman living with HIV looks like. I really am, because I think I want to humanize this disease. But just some days it's just a little too much, and I just want to chill and blend in with the background. So I would say the same thing.
Yes, and I discern a lot whether or not I'm going to tell someone. Last year I've been traveling a whole lot, and I was going through the airport, and the TSA, she was, you know, patting down or whatever just to make sure I was clear. And she said, "Where are you heading?" I said, "I'm heading to DC, and I'm going to United States Conference on AIDS." And she said, "Oh, you do that kind of work?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "I am a woman living with HIV." And so it was almost like I felt like I needed to let her know that. And just like Venita was saying, you know, that they can see that HIV has no look. You know, I'm a woman living with HIV, and I'm healthy, I'm strong, and I'm alive. And she gave me a prayer line, a prayer call, and she said, get on this prayer call. So it was almost like a spiritual awakening at that moment. And every time I go to the airport, she hugs me and she said, I'm proud of you. And she said, keep doing what you're doing because it looks good on you. So that, you know, I tell, and sometimes I don't, but you know, it helps others when I disclose, you know, just telling my story, it helps.
And
It not only helps me, but it helps others.
And see, Stacy, when a couple times when I have gone and I've been going to a place that I would have just said, if I was not in the mood, I'm going to a conference.
Mm-hmm.
And then another time I might have said which conference. So
Yeah, I've done that.
mm-hmm.
So I joke and I say I use my HIV as a weapon when I'm traveling.
Yeah.
I weaponize. Because I talk about, like, I'm a woman living with HIV, and all of a sudden I've got all the armrests, all the space, all the armrests. But you know, there are times where you're just tired. You're just tired and you're worn out, and you don't want to have to, you know, deal with the explanation. And yeah, sometimes it's just a conference. Sometimes it's a summit of women living with health challenges. You know, we get to I think we all get to step back, because this is hard. This is hard stuff. But yeah, if I want all the armrests, I disclose. That's the cootie factor, you know. And yeah, I mean, which is awful because it's actually capitalizing on stigma. And as the plane lands and they have not touched me for the entire flight, then I actually will explain to them. I'll say, hey, by the way, you gave me all this room. I didn't need it. I'm not able to transmit my HIV, but I appreciated the space.
As for myself, a person who talks about HIV in person in schools and on social media, I definitely identified my barriers, and I just don't overextend myself. I don't voluntarily overextend what I share, and I share when I'm really moved to share. So I never feel as if I need to share just because someone asks me. And even in person, when I'm asked questions that I feel is not really going to get to the meat and potatoes of a conversation, I'll craft it to the meat and potato conversation. So that's how I've been able to handle the stresses of overly talking about or my personal life.
Thank you. So there's a comment here, Oakland at Kaiser. I think she goes to Oakland. She lives in Oakland and goes to Kaiser and has an amazing doctor. Oh, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just got a message saying that it didn't detect sound from my microphone. Sorry. Okay. Since the beginning, and started one of the first programs for women since most of the resources had been for men. I was not diagnosed for several years, including by infectious disease specialists, because I didn't fit the profile. I had AIDS when I was finally diagnosed and almost did not make it, still recovering after 4 years of treatment. Wow. And then there's a follow-up comment from someone else who says that she can so relate. She sought treatment for respiratory problems and had severe diarrhea for over a year before she was diagnosed. And then only because she was admitted to ICU and a nurse there had experience treating AIDS patients. They finally did a lung biopsy, which showed I can never pronounce this right, pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. And then they were like, oh, And that was in 97 in Palm Springs, where HIV and AIDS were definitely on the radar, but I didn't fit the profile. 20 plus years later, though, I'm healthy and feeling great. So hang in there. It took me a few years too, but it does get better. So thank you both for sharing that. And I've got a question here. How comfortable are you all with taking your meds? Do you sometimes take a day off?
I'm very comfortable with taking my meds, but a couple of the medications that I have migraine headaches, and now I go to a chiropractor, and so I'm feeling better, and so I said, you know what, I'm gonna take a week off now. In 22 years, I have not taken my medicine, but I said, you know what, this medication is causing these headaches, it's causing all kind of other things to go wrong, so I stopped taking it for like a week, and the headaches went away. But I'm back on my medication. You know, I wouldn't recommend that you do that, but I'm still undetectable. My viral load is 0. They don't like to say 0, so they say less than 10, and my CD4 count is almost 1,300.
Wonderful. I'm comfortable only when I forget, which I don't do much. But there have been times when, because I went through a change of my medicine about a year ago, and I just wasn't, my body was not adjusting to that well, and so it really got to be torturous to want to go take that medicine, knowing I was going to feel that way until I could get it changed. So yeah, I'm okay with taking the medicine, but I don't want to keep taking. I'm not going to take something that's going to give me side effects that I'm not comfortable with or that I don't feel I have to have. And so and I'm not a doctor. Don't try this at home. But when they kept trying to press one medicine that I didn't like, that was making me sick, I put myself back on my old medicine, which is one I had at home, and stayed undetectable. And when I went back, I told them I put myself back on my other one, and we did labs, and I was still undetectable and continued to take that one. Because sometimes other folks don't know, what we're feeling. And I've heard stories from others who doctors gave them pushback when they asked to change medicines or wanted them to change at a time they didn't. And so that would be the only times I think that I wouldn't take it, but I'm really comfortable.
Yeah, I take my medication whether I want to or not, and a lot of the time I don't want to. But I've been taking HIV medication since the early days. I'm one of those people who took AZT when I set my timer to wake up in the middle of the night. So I have a lot of resistance, and I have had conversations with doctors about, if I don't like the medication I'm on, what I can switch to, and I don't have a lot of choices. And so I am, one of a small group of people who has that experience. Yeah. So I make sure that I take my medication all of the time, and I feel really grateful that other people are not stuck in that corner about having to take it regardless of if it causes side effects, because the ones I'm on doesn't exactly agree with me, but I don't have a lot of choices. So I do what I have to do.
Right.
Well, I've given myself a 2-hour window to take my medications. I take one pill a day. I take it at night. So usually before I get sleepy, I usually take it. Or sometimes I usually take it around 8 o'clock. But if I find myself going to sleep earlier, like at 6, usually I'll wake up like at 9, so I just take it then. So I don't be too hard on myself by giving myself that 2-hour window. And again, That's not my doctor's recommendations, but that just works for me.
You. And there's a comment here. I take one pill and I take it regularly. I'm undetectable as of February 19th, 2018, less than 20. Woo woo. That's great. That's great. So I'm going to run another quick poll if folks want to. Wait, where's my other poll? I had another poll here. Oh, wait, here we go. I'm still learning how to work this thing. Okay. I'm launching another quick poll. So who is the first person you told about your HIV status? And the options are a trusted friend, my partner, a parent, or another close relative, someone else I know who's living with HIV. No one knows except my healthcare providers, or someone who doesn't fall into one of those other categories.
Me.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Thanks to folks who answered. So you should be able to see the results now. So it looks like most of the people who answered, a plurality said a parent or another close relative, which makes sense. And it, you know, we heard from Stacy that she first told her mom and then she regretted telling her mom. So I'd like to ask, like, what for the panelists and also for folks who are just joining us over here, like what have been folks' experiences sharing with family, good or bad? How has that gone, generally speaking?
I'm gonna go.
Sure. Anyone who wants to. And different family, it doesn't necessarily have to be parents, but you know, we heard about talking to your kids about it, talking to parents, and there's been really a pretty wide range of reactions and ways that folks have handled it.
So for me, I'm sorry, send me the question again.
Just how has it gone, like telling family about it?
So for me, it has gone pretty well. You know, I didn't tell them all at once, and it happened over a period of years when I felt ready, because I knew in telling them I was going to always have to be ready for the response or the reaction. And I had a voice in me that said, you better be able to deal with it first before you tell other people, because I was afraid of the rejection. I was afraid of what may happen. And so the folks I told were very kind of spaced as I felt ready, but from family, all my responses have been really good. For something like my mom, she's one that did not find out till probably 7 years later, and it wasn't me, and me who told her, because she has these old world ideas. And even afterwards, you know, she tried to be supportive, but she said, you know, we're not going to tell other people because, you know, they really wouldn't understand if they knew. And I said, okay, so I have a brother with colon cancer. She can share that one, but she can't share mine. So, and, you know, I'm not bothered, but I told her, don't bother me. We can talk about it. But she's 70, whatever, 8. And so it's not a big deal. But everyone else, wonderful.
Thanks. What about other folks? Other than, you know, the stories we've already heard, were there any that were especially good or especially bad?
Well, I have received enormous amount of support. And I was very happy, in particular, for the support of the family that I grew up with. They contacted me and told me that, you know, they still love me, and you know, pretty much that, you know, they're proud of me. So, you know, as far as negative responses, I haven't dealt with any directly. I'm sure there's some indirectly behind my back, but it hasn't come into my attention.
Thanks. Someone put in the Q&A box, my kids are very supportive, but my mom is very abusive and my siblings did not react well. And then someone else is saying, my mom worked in the health field taking care of people living with HIV and AIDS. When I told her, she was very scared for me with my CD4 being a 6. And then the only person who didn't take it well was my father. I feel like he was very disappointed in me.
You know, I could describe another reaction. One of the other kinds of reactions I got was with my best friend, who of 20, 30 years, and who was immediately supportive. But as I began to went into a depression for a long time and had thoughts of suicide, could not deal with hearing that, and I stopped talking to her, because when she would call, she would let me talk because she didn't want to have to hear what I was feeling. So I ended up stopping talking to her. So it was a double whammy for me, just to feel the loss or abandonment that I felt from that friend who just really couldn't deal with hearing how I felt. And so that was an interesting experience that, it was pretty painful at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because I came back to Boulder, you know, because in the early days we came back to get our affairs in order, expecting to die. And so I came back and I had a bunch of friends from high school who I was really close with, and they all helped me plan my funeral. It was going to be beautiful. We had music, and then I didn't die. And it was interesting because they had a harder time with living and what that looked like. And so I'm actually not friends with many of them any longer, because they had put me in a box, and I didn't stay there. And so it's interesting, and I'm curious. I find that most of my friends, the people I have really honest conversations with, are people living with HIV, or people who do a lot of work in the HIV field who understand. And I just sort of thought about that, and I wonder if that's common for other people as well.
I'm seeing, and over here in the Q&A box, Alicia says, I went through the same thing with my old best friend, Venita. So it's about losing a best friend with it. And here's another one. I was 57 and both parents were gone. I didn't tell my siblings for more than a year. Similar feelings to what Venita is saying. I first told my brother because I could no longer work and couldn't pay my mortgage and needed to borrow money. He and my sister-in-law were wonderfully supportive and even asked that I talk to my niece and nephew so that they would know that they needed to be safe. My sister was the opposite, just stared at me, never said anything unless I was having challenges. And then she said, oh, my illness, my illness. I don't want to hear about your illness. Her kids were great though. And then another one, I can't tell my sisters and brothers or my friends about my fight with depression and suicide. At those times, I call it crisis line.
Wow.
The hardest time was the holidays and during a breakup. That's really hard.
Mm. Mm.
That's really hard. And, I think that's actually that's what our executive director, Nana, is saying over here in the chat box. I think there's some things that only other women living with HIV or people living with HIV can understand. Like when I'm freaking out about whether to disclose to a new partner, I reach out to other women living with HIV, even though I go to other friends for other kinds of relationship advice.
Yeah. It's funny. I have other women living with HIV call me up and ask me to help them disclose, what can they, I share with them some of the things that I do. So yeah, I do think we are the resource for that. I was in a group last night with, I went to a rural community last night to meet with a group of people living with HIV who don't get around. And only one woman showed up, a Latina woman. And so there was nothing but social workers in this room, me and her. And I was trying to block them out to talk to her. And at the end, when she asked maybe she should have something to read, these women started talking about these research books and these other things. And I was sitting there about to scream. I hope she's on this webinar because I gave them information. But I was like, how about reading the stories of other women living with HIV to see because she said, you describe what I went through. And so I thought, we got to get you connected. Put down the research and all that other stuff that they were giving her and let her just read the stories of other women living with HIV and how we got through the hard part that she's going through. So yeah, there's some things that only we understand.
Yeah. Yeah, PWN is very special for that. I know a lot of folks get a lot of support through PWN.
Okay, I'm doing too much.
So I see another comment in the Q&A box. I told my oldest son when we were headed to South Florida for him to begin college. This was after we were discussing his sex life. And he asked me why my husband and I were using condoms. When I was done explaining that he was fine, no one else in my family knows though. I don't think my youngest son is mature enough to handle it. The crazy part about it is that I have lost an uncle, aunt, and cousin from complications of AIDS. And other family members, once they found out about the three, they had all kinds of different reactions. And then here, my siblings were very supportive, sad, and angry at the same time. My mother was sad, and then to my surprise was the one who stigmatized me, saying things like, don't walk barefoot in her house and don't use her toilet. I educated my mother instead of not talking to her, and now she is an advocate for HIV. I forgave my mother instead of saying sad and angry. You only get one mother, and I wasn't about to lose her over this. So I'm really glad you were able to educate her and that she was open to learning, and that it didn't end your relationship. And then here's another comment. When I was brave enough to date again, I told him and he was very supportive. He has moved to Colombia and we live a wonderful life together. He goes to summits with me and always enjoys learning more. That's great.
Ah, yay.
There are definitely good stories too.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I'm going to do one last poll here, sort of on a similar topic. And so the question is, who was it hardest to tell? And who did you find it hardest to tell about your HIV status, or whom have you not told yet because you fear it will be difficult? My children, my parents, siblings, or other close relatives, my partners or romantic interests, an employer or colleagues at work, my friends, none of the above, I've had no trouble disclosing, or other. Okay, so it looks like there's a tie for children and parents or siblings. So it looks like family is was both the first people that people tend to tell, but also the hardest.
Yeah.
I wonder if anyone has anything they'd like to share around how do you start the conversation with someone that you know it's going to be challenging to tell?
I think those that you may think it's hard to tell is just start by talking about HIV and start with educating. And so, because once you start with educating, then it tends to be easier to talk about what's going on, because then they'll start talking about, well, hey, I have a friend who, passed away, or I have an uncle who I help take care of. And then once you just get a feel of the conversation, then it's easier to, get into talking about your own self.
Thank you. That's good advice. How do other folks start the conversation, or have you started it?
I can't remember. I can't remember. Probably the hardest person I had to tell was my daughter. And it's interesting because I lived in DC and I was diagnosed in April and going through a hard time, and she decided to pop up in DC for the July 4th weekend and happened to be there. And I was trying to keep myself together during her visit because I didn't want to show her that how I was feeling. And I just didn't want to share with her about it. But the night before she left, I just had to. And even though I felt like I wanted to fall apart, the main thing I knew that I had to do was keep myself together, because if I showed her that I was falling apart, although she saw that later, but at the time I didn't want her, and knowing she was going to have to leave, to see me in that distressed state that I really was in. And so I had to kind of act like a big girl, I would say, and share it with her. And for one of the reasons why it was the hardest to me, I thought in my mind, because she's going to go through pain because she knows this is something difficult, that I had caused pain on my family. I brought pain to her, and I just was really just felt horrible about it. And so I had to keep myself together so that she would think that I was dealing with it and it was going to be okay. And she would be able to leave without having to totally worry. She still worried, but she didn't get to see how I really felt. And over time she learned, but I didn't want her to know right then.
I found writing has been therapeutic for me in disclosing, and also using art.
Good idea.
Thank you. Yes, I have written some poems. I've written a letter to my newly diagnosed self, which can be, molded into a letter, addressed to the person that you would like to talk to. It seems kind of old school now to write someone a letter, but I just found writing, in different forms, even in my advocacy, when I'm writing about a issue related to HIV, and then sharing that article with my loved ones, it's been a therapeutic way of disclosure for me.
Thank you. I've got a comment here in the box. Sometimes I get so tired of trying to work out who to tell and who not to tell. I just want to wear an HIV positive t-shirt every day for the rest of my life, so I never have to have the talk again. It's just out there. I've had almost all supportive reactions, but it's still a hard conversation to start. And then here's a comment. I say before you say anything, and then I educate. And then here, I was afraid my children wouldn't love me anymore, that they would be afraid of me, but it was the total opposite. They supported, embraced me, and loved me unconditionally. I educated my children at very young ages on sexually transmitted diseases, sex, good touches and bad touches, as well as open communication. Great. And I find that it would bother me most if I have to tell someone in my church family because of the stigma within our religious institutions, or with people who you know are religious, like Stacy was talking about earlier. Great. And then we have a question here. What are the places or states that you experience more acceptance or less stigma? Has anyone found a state where there's no stigma? Can we all go there?
Oh, I don't know that place.
Do you guys think that it varies from place to place, or is it pretty much universal in your experience?
Well, for me, a New York-born person, and living in New York for most of my diagnosis, I found New York to be more of a open-minded, educated environment than Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm currently. I found it to be very challenging to have educated conversations. Usually the conversation tried to go into more of a gossip columnist. How you pronounce that word?
Columnist. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I found the environment to be very harsh out here compared to New York, where I feel like New Yorkers, they've been on the battlefield before. They needed to do, they're doing it, and they're just, moving forward. Where here is like more just pointing the finger and blaming people, and not really looking at oneself and seeing how oneself can be a solution to the problem.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you say that you feel like there's more stigma in Georgia, specifically in Georgia where you live, but the South does have the highest rates of new acquisitions of HIV. So I don't think, maybe it's not a coincidence that if people can't talk about it, then that's part of the problem right there.
Absolutely.
Great. And then I have here in the box, the hardest has been to tell my parents. My mom was waiting outside the clinic for me after I got my results. After she stopped crying, I asked her to go ahead and tell my dad. I went home later that day and he was at the door with open arms, thankfully, and just held me. After speaking to my parents, it was somewhat easier for me to open up to others about it. Although telling a possible intimate partner of my status has been the moment that brings extreme anxiety for me. And then there's a comment here, if you don't have thick skin, don't head down south to Florida.
Or Texas.
Yeah, great. Well, we are right about time. I really want to thank our panelists again so much for sharing your stories, for producing the video, for being here, talking with everyone, being so open and candid about your experiences, good and bad. I know it's really powerful, and I think it's really needed. And I'm really hoping that a lot of folks who are joining us here today, that will be seeing you at our summit next month. I know all my panelists here are going to be at the summit, and so I hope plenty of other folks in the over here on the attendee list will also be there. And for those of you who might be having a really hard time with this issue or with other ones, if you're going to the summit, I think you're going to find it a really safe place where you're going to, you know, meet a lot of other amazing women who are really going to be there to support you and help you through it, like Barb said at the end of the video. Great. Did anyone want to say any last words before we, not last words like that, but you know what I mean, before we end the webinar?
No, thank you, Jenny, for all your work on this.
Thank you all. Powerhouses.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to sign out now. Thank you all. And if you are not already a member of Positive Women's Network USA and you would like to become one, I strongly encourage you to join. You can do so on our website at pwn-usa.org. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and hope to see you all soon.